Hello, everyone. It's me again, and another evening has fallen, the perfect time for us to immerse ourselves together in the currents of the past. The lamps are low, the fire crackles softly, and the world outside slows down just enough for the whispers of history to reach us. Tonight, we're not going to speak of kings or of battles, not of borders drawn with blood or treaties sealed with wax and iron. No. Tonight, we pull back the heavy oaken doors of the past and step into a world far more personal. One of glances across market stalls, of letters written by candlelight and hidden beneath floorboards, of love, yes, but also duty, strategy, fear, and sometimes a kind of courage that rarely makes it into the chronicles. Tonight, we explore medieval dating. But before we begin, if you love historical tales like this one, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support is a huge motivation for me to continue bringing you more quality content. And don't forget to let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. I'm always curious to know who's joining us on this journey through time from all corners of the world. Now then, let's begin. You might think you know what dating in the medieval world looked like. Perhaps your mind goes to a dashing knight kneeling before a noble lady, pledging his sword and his heart in the same breath. Or maybe you imagine troubadours with lutes, whispering verses beneath high tower windows. Those images aren't entirely wrong, but they are incomplete. They are stories polished by time, simplified for art and pageantry. The truth is grittier, stranger, and much more human. So let's set the stage. The year is 1283. You're in a modest village in the Low Countries. The air smells of damp soil and smoke. Your father is a tanner. His hands are always stained, his temper short. Your mother has borne 7 children, and 5 still live. You're 16, old enough to work, old enough to marry, but whom will you marry? Here's the first thing you need to understand. In medieval Europe, love was not the reason for marriage, not for most. Marriages were contracts, strategic alliances, transactions negotiated between families designed to preserve land, strengthen position, or produce labor. Yes, even among peasants, even among you. Your parents might look at the family next door because their son has 2 oxen and you have none. Or they may consider the baker's daughter from the next village over because her brother is a reeve and has influence with the Lord's steward. You don't get to choose. You don't even get asked. Not really. But does that mean there was no desire, no secret glances, no stolen moments behind hedgerows or in candlelit churches? Far from it. Desire ran like wildfire in medieval life, uncontrolled, forbidden, but never absent. You see, young people had bodies then, just like now, and hormones and longings, and the thrilling terror of first touches. The difference was, acting on it could destroy your life. Because here's the other thing. The church had its say in everything. Sex outside of marriage was a sin. Adultery, a mortal one. But it wasn't just spiritual consequences. A woman who lost her virginity before marriage could be cast out, dishonored, left with no dowry and no protection. A man could be forced to marry, or punished, whipped, excommunicated. So there was tension, a lot of it. People walked tight ropes made of custom honor and flesh. But they found ways. There were village festivals, May Day being the most famous, a riot of flowers, drink, and music. And in some regions, it was openly acknowledged that couples might slip away into the woods. They even had a word for it, greenwood marriages. Temporary unions, sometimes followed by real ones, sometimes not. Now ask yourself, if you were 17, living in a stone cottage, sleeping in a bed with 3 siblings and your grandmother, rising before dawn to muck out animals, How would you find a moment to be alone with someone you loved, or thought you might love? You'd steal time. You'd wait until dusk and sneak out to meet under the hedges. You'd pretend to visit your cousin but detour to the well. You'd smile when the carpenter's apprentice brushed past you and hope he smiled back. You'd slip a token, a ribbon, a carved trinket, into his hands. You'd risk it. Because your heart doesn't know what century it lives in. But not all medieval dating was rustic and hidden. Step with me now into a very different world, a high-born world. You're no longer the tanner's daughter. You are Lady Isabel of Montreuil, 14 winters old. Your fingers have never touched soil. Your hair is brushed each morning with a comb of ivory. You speak French, you write Latin, and your fate has been signed in ink since before you could walk. Your father is a minor noble. He owes fealty to a duke. The duke's nephew is 21, a brute of a man who can barely read, but he has land and soldiers, and your father owes debts. You are the payment. You are told this with ceremony. Your mother smooths your hair and tells you to be brave. She cried on her own wedding night, too. Your nurse whispers that he might not be cruel, that you might have sons, that a quiet woman is a safe woman. You are to wed this man in a month. You have never spoken to him. You've only seen him once, when he spat on a servant boy for dropping a flagon. And yet, you dream. You dream of the troubadour who sings in the hall on feast days, of his hands, clever and calloused, of the way he looks at you, not like property, not like cargo, but like possibility. What do? Do you run? Number, you cannot. Where would you go? You would not last a week. A noblewoman found unchaperoned is presumed to be spoiled goods. You would be caught. You would be ruined. So perhaps you slip a note to the troubadour, written in trembling Latin, folded inside a scrap of linen. He replies, carefully. You meet in the garden, once, then twice. You exchange a kiss, a promise. He says he will leave the castle that night, ride west to Gascony. He asks you to come with him. What would you do? Would you leave everything behind, risk starvation, dishonor, even death, for the chance at something that might be love? Now pause. Just breathe. This is not a fairy tale. This happened again and again. Sometimes it ended in songs, sometimes in blood, sometimes in silence so deep it echoed for generations. The rules of medieval dating were shaped by class, by faith, by fear. But in every case, peasant, noble, or merchant son, those rules bent beneath the weight of human desire. Sometimes they broke. And speaking of rules, let's not forget the peculiar role of the church. The church loathed fornication, but it also enforced the sacrament of marriage. That meant you couldn't just marry anyone. There were laws, complex ones, about consanguinity. You couldn't marry your cousin, or your cousin's cousin, or sometimes someone you just shared a godparent with. You needed a dispensation from the Pope. So what if you were in love with someone you shouldn't be? There were loopholes, promises made before witnesses, gifts exchanged with intent. In some places, simply declaring yourselves husband and wife could create what was known as a clandestine marriage. It wasn't encouraged, but it happened. Often. And the repercussions? That depends. If no one cared, if you were lowborn, it might stand. If you were wealthy, expect scandal, lawsuits, excommunication, maybe worse. But sometimes love wasn't about rebellion. It wasn't fireworks or stolen glances. It was patience, endurance, a flickering warmth that somehow survived the ice of obligation. There are letters, real ones, that survive from the 12th and 13th centuries. Love letters. Imagine that. Ink on parchment, quill in hand, someone writing to a person they miss. My only light in this dark world, the warmth of your breath still lingers on my hand. These were real people, long dead. But their longing remains. So ask yourself this, what would you have done? Could you endure a marriage arranged for politics? Could you resist temptation, knowing one slip could mean ruin? Could you wait 5 years for your lover to return from a crusade, not knowing if he still lived? Would you? Because medieval dating was rarely about courtship in the way we think of it. It was a negotiation between flesh and fear, between law and lust, between heaven and the earth beneath your feet. And that, perhaps, is why it matters, because behind all the banners and bloodshed, behind the kings and saints and clerics, history is made of people, people who hoped, people who burned, people who reached for one another in the dark, and sometimes, just sometimes, found a way to hold on. And now the darkness deepens, not in tone but in mystery, because while we've spoken of peasant glances and noble marriages, we've only begun to scrape the surface of how medieval people navigated love and union. There were other forces at play, silent forces, invisible, binding, and they had names: honor, reputation, fertility, dowry, kinship, faith. These were the weights hanging from every romantic choice, and they pulled relentlessly. Let's go now to the edge of a forest near a town you've never heard of. It is dusk. The trees are dripping with mist. You hear a bell in the distance, the evening angelus rung by monks behind stone walls. You are 15. Your name is Wolf. You have a hand cart, and in it bread and cloth, because your uncle's household depends on your delivery. But you're not thinking about bread. You're thinking about Fredeber. She walks like springtime. Her laugh is soft, rare. She serves ale at the tavern, but you know she's not meant to be there much longer. Her father has promised her to the Reeve's son, a man with thick wrists and cold eyes. You've seen the bruises on the younger stable boys he disciplines with too much pleasure. You've seen the future in his scowl, and you don't want her to live in it. So what do? You cannot propose. You own nothing. You have no land, no animals, no savings. A marriage without a dowry is like a roof without beams. It collapses. And yet, you've met her at the back of the barn, shared a crust of rye, laughed until your ribs ached. Once, you touched her hand. It felt like blasphemy. So you do what boys have done since time was born. You speak to her brother, quietly, carefully. You promise you'll find work on the road, send coin. You'll wait. She'll wait. The brother doesn't say yes, but he doesn't say no, and that, small as it is, means the world. Because even among commoners, even when love was real, marriage was a clan decision. You didn't marry just a person. You married their family, their debts, their future. Everyone had a stake, and so came the matchmaking. You might not have imagined medieval mothers as matchmakers, but they were. Fiercely so. A mother who lost her husband early, with 3 children and only 1 cow, knew exactly how much a son-in-law with a plow team was worth. She'd whisper at wells, scheme at markets, arrange for chance meetings at church. The moment you confessed your interest to a parent, your entire household knew. And from there it either began, the careful, chess-like dance of proposal, or it ended, swift and unceremonious, like a candle snuffed in wind. Now let's look higher again, not to the nobility, but the merchant class, the rising towns, the guildmasters and cloth merchants, the men who had begun to stitch together fortunes out of wool and wax and shipping lanes. In Bruges, in Florence, in Cologne, young women were commodities in a different way, not tools of feudal diplomacy, but of economic alliance. A baker's daughter might wed a spice merchant's son to secure access to better ingredients. A silversmith might marry off his niece to a glove-maker's apprentice, ensuring control over raw goods, over trade routes, over influence at the local court. But in these cases, something different began to appear. Contracts, written marriage contracts. Not just dowry lists or land rights, but agreements that outlined who paid for what, when, and under what conditions. And often included promises of fidelity, of obedience, and sometimes, yes, of affection. So imagine you are Agneta, 17, born into a household of weavers in Lübeck. Your family owns looms. You've never known hunger. You speak 3 languages, Middle Low German, Latin, and French. A man, Nicholas, is being considered for you. He is older, 34. His fingers are ink-stained. He works in accounts. His boots are polished, his teeth mostly present. You are brought to him under the watch of your aunt. He bows. You curtsy. You are offered marzipan, perfumed with rosewater. He asks if you play the lute. You say yes, though you do not. He quotes Boethius. You smile. That night your father asks what you thought. You say, he seems kind. And that is enough. They draft a contract. It names your dowry, 400 silver pfennigs, 2 bolts of dyed wool, and a walnut chest filled with linens. It names your future husband's responsibility to provide shelter, clothing, meat on feast days, protection, and affection. There is even a clause that says he may not strike you unless absolutely necessary, a bitter kindness in a brutal world. The church, of course, is involved. A ban must be read 3 Sundays in a row, aloud in church, declaring your intent to marry. Anyone can object, maybe your cousins, maybe he's already married, maybe there's a scandal. If no one speaks, you may wed. And the wedding? Not what you imagine. No white dress, no rings exchanged beneath rose arches. The ceremony is held in church, yes, before God, but the feast is what matters. That is where reputations are made or broken. You are paraded through the town, bread is broken, wine is shared, there is singing, sometimes dancing, and at the end, the bedding. Yes, the bedding ceremony. It is exactly what it sounds like. In some towns and in some eras, the bride and groom are led to the bed by family and friends. Sometimes they are undressed by them. Prayers are said. The couple is left alone to complete the union. And in the morning there may be evidence, the sheet, marked, displayed, proof of virginity or not, the pressure, crushing. And yet somehow, within all this spectacle, all this calculation, real love could bloom. Some couples wrote letters to each other even after 10 years of marriage. Some husbands petitioned the church to live in chastity with their wives, choosing spiritual partnership over flesh. Some wives followed their husbands into war, into pilgrimage, into exile. Not always, but often enough to matter. Now, we need to talk about courtly love. Ah yes, the poets, the troubadours, the knights who rode into battle with a lady's favor tied to their lance. But here's the truth. Courtly love was never meant to end in marriage. It was a game. A stylized, often cynical game of flirtation, full of rules and rituals. It was practiced by nobles and poets in courts from Aquitaine to Aragon, a theater of longing designed to exalt the lady and test the knight's virtue. A lady was to be worshipped from afar. She might be married, indeed she often was. That was part of the game. The knight would pine. He would write verse. He would perform heroic deeds. She would reward him with a glance, a word, a token. Sometimes it went further. Sometimes it became a real affair, dangerous, deadly. Sometimes it remained fantasy. But it shaped the language of love for centuries. The idea of the unattainable woman, of love as suffering, of passion as a holy torment, it was born here. And even today, echoes of it remain. You feel it in sonnets, in love songs, in tragic films where lovers die but do not touch. It was invented here, in halls of stone, in the gardens of Eleanor of Aquitaine, in the ink of Andreas Capellanus, who wrote The Art of Courtly Love, a book equal parts satire and instruction manual. But for most people, love was not a game. It was a risk. If you were a woman, love could get you pregnant. And in a world with no reliable contraception, that meant life or death for you, for the child, and for your reputation. So midwives whispered secrets, herbal infusions, methods passed down in riddles and hush, pennyroyal, rue mugwort, dangerous bitter herbs that could prevent or end pregnancy. But the line between medicine and poison was thin, and often deadly. If you were a man, love could cost you status, land, even freedom. A broken engagement could lead to lawsuits, yes, real lawsuits, in ecclesiastical courts where jilted women sued for breach of promise and won. And then there were the love charms, found in grimoires, hidden beneath pillows, sewn into sleeves, a drop of blood in wine, a strand of hair in beeswax, names scratched onto lead amulets. These weren't games. They were desperate acts. People wanted love, needed it. And when all else failed, they turned to magic. Because magic, like love, ignored rules. So ask yourself again, what would you have done? Would you marry the butcher's son because your father said so? Would you run away with the stable boy, knowing you'd never be welcomed home again? Would you drink the potion made by the old widow who speaks to cats and never attends Mass? Would you? Because in the end, the heart wants what it wants. And even in a world ruled by men, by money, by church and crown, the heart still beat. Loudly, fiercely, even then. But even the strongest hearts have limits. What happens when love becomes dangerous? Not because of who you love, but what you are. You are a woman, born to a fatherless household in a village small enough to be forgotten by kings. You are clever, too clever. Your tongue is sharp. You don't smile when men expect it. You learn herbs from your grandmother, secrets wrapped in thorns. You grow up and you fall in love. But you are not supposed to love her. Her name is Isabel. She smells like heather and milk. Her laughter makes your ribs ache. And when she touches your hand in the orchard one hot afternoon when the bees are slow and lazy, it is as if the world catches fire in secret. You kiss once, just once, but someone sees. And suddenly the whispers begin, not of love, not even of sin, but of witchcraft. Because in the medieval mind, some love was not merely forbidden, it was unnatural, monstrous. And where there was the unnatural, there was the devil. Men loving men, women loving women. Desires that didn't conform to reproduction, to the church's idea of divine order. It wasn't just scandalous, it was criminal. And worse, spiritual treason. So the church wrote laws, theologians thundered from pulpits, penances were prescribed, years of fasting, of pilgrimage, of prayer. Some were whipped in public, some were mutilated, others disappeared into dungeons. The irony? The same church that condemned desire was obsessed with it. Sermons spoke of temptation in vivid detail. Manuals described forbidden acts so luridly that they read like the era's first pornography. And in doing so, they preserved it, recorded it. And so we know love was everywhere, hidden, whispered, furtive, and real, even in monasteries, especially in monasteries. Picture this. You are Brother Alaric, a novice in a Benedictine abbey on the Rhine. You are devout. You wake before dawn. You chant the Psalms. You copy manuscripts by candlelight. But your gaze lingers too long on Brother Thomas's neck as he bends to stir the ink. You confess it. You try to beat it out of yourself. You fast. You pray. And yet he smiles at you in the cloister garden. His fingers brush yours when you hand him a page. And suddenly, all the years of doctrine and fear melt into a single, terrifying joy. Were there lovers among monks and nuns? Yes and no. There were souls that sought one another. Sometimes they found joy, sometimes ruin, sometimes silence. But desire, again, found a way. It always did. And not just among people. Objects carried love. Hair braids wrapped in ribbon, embroidered handkerchiefs, tiny paintings, lockets containing teeth or splinters of bone. These were tokens, proofs, pledges, and the poetry. Oh, the poetry, Middle High German Minnesang, sung by courtly lovers, trouvère ballads in northern France, Andalusian verses soaked in honey and fire. Even in Iceland, runes carved in love spells under the moon. One reads, "Let her love me as she loves bread and ale. Let her eyes seek mine as the doe seeks water." Simple, honest, haunting. So don't be fooled by the stone faces in medieval art. Don't be misled by the severity of saints and kings. Under the veils, beneath the mail, behind the hedgerows and carved pews, love burned quietly, sometimes wildly, and sometimes so quietly it never even had a name. But what are those who were not meant to love at all? Let me tell you about anchorites. You may never have heard the word. That's no fault of yours. It's simply history forgetting. An anchorite was a person who chose to live sealed inside a cell permanently, usually next to a church, sometimes literally bricked in. Their life? Prayer, silence, devotion, no family, no lovers, not even a glimpse of sky. Why? Because to the medieval mind, the holiest love was not toward another person, but God Himself. And some sought Him by stripping themselves of everything human, including desire. Imagine the day of your enclosure. You are 25. A woman named Juliana. You wear a white robe. You are led in a procession. Psalms are sung. The bishop blesses you. You step inside a tiny stone room. Then the door is bricked shut. You are not coming out. You will never again feel a breeze, never touch another hand in affection, never walk. But you believe utterly that this is love, the truest love, a marriage to Christ. And so you write, you pray, you speak to those who pass by your window, asking for advice or comfort. And centuries later, we find your words. Julian of Norwich, the anchoress who, shut away in stillness, spoke of divine love so vast it melted fear. "All shall be well," she wrote, "and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." A love letter to the world from a woman who could not touch it. And so we ask, was she unloved? Or was her love simply too big for one body? You decide. Now let's shift again, across the sea, to lands where medieval rules were different, though no less strict. Japan, the Heian court, 11th century. There love was an art, a code, a poetry of shadows. Men and women sent one another letters on scented paper, poems of longing, veiled in metaphor. A glance from behind a screen could mean everything. A tryst occurred at night in secret, the man departing before dawn. But a real relationship, it came only if the woman's family allowed him to return, again and again. And in this world of twilight and ritual, a woman wrote. Her name was Murasaki Shikibu. And in the tale of Genji, she created a prince, a man of impossible charm and impossible longing, who loved women not as conquests, but as mirrors to his own sadness. It is one of the oldest novels in the world, a meditation on love, loss, jealousy, memory, and it was written by a woman in a palace, in an era when most women's voices were silenced. You see, medieval dating wasn't just about who touched whom or when. It was about meaning, about where affection sat in the cosmos. Was it sacred? Was it sinful? Was it both? Let's return now to Europe. A winter wedding, Strasbourg, 1346. You are a guest. The church is cold, but the air is warm with breath and fire. The bride wears blue. Yes, blue, not white. White was not traditional yet. Blue was the color of the Virgin, of purity, of the heavens. The groom is nervous. His hands tremble. He has never touched a woman. She, barely older, looks determined, eyes forward. Her veil is simple linen. They are joined by vows in Latin. He promises to keep her and cherish her. She promises to obey him. And then the priest places their hands upon a Bible, and they are bound. But even after all this, the church, the feast, the bedding, there is one final condition. The marriage is not valid unless consummated. That is the law. Without intercourse, it is not considered a union. And if that never happens, if he is impotent, or she refuses, or something else occurs, the marriage can be annulled. So the pressure is enormous. Imagine being that boy, that girl, alone now, in a bed piled with furs and fear, no instruction, no tenderness, just centuries of tradition weighing on your chest. How many faltered, how many cried, and how many, against all odds, found something else, found laughter, found warmth, found love? Because that's the truth, isn't it? Despite the rules, the barriers, the threats, love found a way, in castles, in villages, in taverns, in forests, in monasteries, in letters, in glances, in songs, and even in silence, especially in silence. But silence couldn't always protect you. It could hide a blush, conceal a glance, but not a scandal, not a pregnancy. And that, perhaps, was the greatest fear of all. You are a maid in a noble household, you wash linens, you carry wine jugs, you hear everything and are seen by no one, until one night when the master's son, 17 and flushed with drink, corners you, he laughs, calls you little dove. His hand is warm, rough. You say no, but you are a servant. And servants don't have the luxury of refusing sons of lords. Weeks pass, then it happens. Your courses stop, and suddenly silence is your enemy, because now the women in the kitchens are whispering. The steward narrows his eyes when he looks at you. Your belly betrays you faster than your lips ever could. You're brought before the lady of the house. She wears rings like knives. She looks you over like spoiled meat. Then she orders you sent away, quietly. Before the guests arrive for the harvest feast, you give birth in a convent, alone. The child is taken. And what do you have left? A body stitched with shame, a mouth sewn shut by threat, and a heart still remembering the boy's laugh. Not because you loved him, but because no one else ever looked at you before. This was not rare. This was not unusual. This was the invisible daily fabric of medieval romance for millions, for those without names, without titles, without defenses. But it didn't end there, because what if you were the noble, a girl of high birth, promised to a man you'd never met, a man 30 years your elder? You are 12, no, 14 if we're generous. You ride in a carriage to his estate. You wear pearls. Your mother weeps. Your father says nothing. At the gate, a man waits, a face like stone. This is your husband. You curtsy. He nods. Later that night, in a chamber scented with clove and rose water, he comes to you. You're expected to endure, to smile, to breed, because that is your purpose, not to love, to secure land, to forge alliances, to bring your family closer to power. And yet, your heart has other plans. You meet a knight. He's not a shining figure from storybooks. He smells of leather and smoke. He limps slightly from a campaign in Aquitaine. But he listens to you, really listens. You speak of falconry, of the stars, of poetry. And when your fingers touch one day as he helps you mount a horse, something electric passes between you like a secret no one else can hear. Is it dangerous? Yes. Is it madness? Perhaps. But what would you do? Would you keep your place? Or take the risk? Many did, and many paid. Remember Eleanor, Duchess of Aquitaine, married young to the King of France. A political union, no joy, no fire. But later, she falls for Henry Plantagenet, the future King of England, and she chooses him. Divorces Louis, marries Henry, bears him 8 children, becomes queen of not one, but 2 kingdoms. And what is the cost? Betrayal, rebellion, prison, because powerful women in love frighten men, and yet her legend endures, because she loved boldly, grandly, on her own terms. But not everyone could do the same. Most lived quietly, in corners, in gardens, in shadows. Take the midwife. She's neither noble nor peasant. She lives on the edge of town, with a black cat and a pouch of dried sage. She knows what to do when girls come crying in the night. She knows how to help them when the bleeding won't stop. She's seen it all. And one night she meets a man, a pilgrim, traveling alone. He is kind, too kind. And for the first time in 20 years, she dares to hope. He stays through winter, then spring comes. And he's gone, left her nothing but a carved whistle in the shape of a bird, and a memory she'll carry to her grave. Is that not love? Even if it ends, even if no one else believes it happened? And sometimes, love wasn't between two people at all. Sometimes it was between a person and a dream. The troubadour, wandering from court to court, living in threadbare glory, pouring his soul into verse, singing of a woman he never touched, a lady too noble, too distant. He does not seek her body. He worships her from afar, her smile, her spirit. This was Fenimore, the refined love of the troubadours, a pure, unconsummated devotion, a kind of holy ache. And it was fashionable, even fashionable to suffer. To love someone you could never have was the most poetic tragedy of all. And yet, beneath the silk and the song, desire thrummed. Behind the lute strings, the sonnets, the flowers pressed into glove boxes, something very real beat in those hearts, something human. You see, not all medieval love was forced or tragic. Some was gentle, some was funny, some even adorable. Picture a village fair, children darting between booths, smoke curling from roasting sausages, a young blacksmith stammering as he hands a girl a ribbon. Her cheeks flush. She says nothing, but she ties it in her braid. A promise. Later they dance. Not well, but who cares? They laugh, he trips, she teases. And just for one moment, the crushing weight of medieval life lifts. No lords, no plagues, no sermons, just two people, finding each other in the dust. And maybe, just maybe, falling in love. Because medieval dating wasn't always about marriage or bloodlines or sin. Sometimes it was just two hands brushing near the apples, two smiles shared across a fire, two hearts beating, however briefly, in sync. Even if they had to hide it, even if the world said no, even if history forgot their names. But we haven't forgotten, because tonight you heard them, felt them, and you understand now, don't you? Love in the Middle Ages was not so different from today. Messy, sacred, hilarious, painful, unpredictable, and utterly, hopelessly human. But love, as you now know, was never safe, not in an age where salvation hung by a thread and every emotion, every touch risked ruin. And perhaps nowhere was that more true than when love collided with God. Because in the Middle Ages, your heart didn't belong to you. It belonged to the church, and the church? It had rules, strict ones. The body was a battlefield. Flesh was temptation. Desire, especially unwed desire, was a sin with eternal consequences. And so, the church did what it knew best. It regulated, it classified, it punished. Let me take you there. It's a Sunday morning. You're in a stone chapel. Light streams through colored glass. The air smells of damp wool and incense. And from the pulpit, the priest speaks, not of grace or heaven, but of your body. He tells you when you may marry, whom you may marry, how often you may lie with your spouse, and why. He warns you against lust. He warns you about touching yourself, about kissing too long, about positions too joyous. Even laughter in the wrong place was suspect, because laughter led to closeness, and closeness led to pleasure, and pleasure, unchecked, led to the devil's work. The priest looks directly at you as he says this. You lower your eyes. You pray your secrets stay secret. But what if they didn't? What if you slipped? What if you couldn't resist the tanner's apprentice, the one with crooked teeth and a laugh like a spring storm? You met him twice behind the barn, just twice, but a neighbor saw you. Now you're summoned before the archdeacon's court. The door creaks open. Cold stone walls, a table with a book, and men in robes who ask you questions you do not want to answer. Did he touch you? Where? Did you allow it? You say no. They ask again. You say you were seduced. They nod. Then fine you 2 shillings for fornication. But he pays only 1. You are shamed. He is not. And the court moves on. This happened. Not once. Not rarely. Often. We have records, entire ledgers of these church courts. Names of women dragged before clergy for holding hands after dark, for being seen in a field, for giving birth too soon after a wedding. Each record is a whisper of a life, a confession pried loose under pressure, a love affair snuffed out by law. But some didn't confess. Some ran, some fled into the woods, the hills, the borderlands, anywhere beyond the reach of priests and patriarchs, and there they found another world, a looser world, a dangerous one, but sometimes a freer one. Picture it. You are Margot. You live in a village that barely has a name. Your family are outlaws. Your mother once struck a reeve with a spade. You grow herbs, sell cider. Your skirts are too short, your laughter too loud, and people talk. They call you a hedge witch, a temptress, a creature of sin. But the miller's son doesn't believe them. He comes to you for balm when his hands crack in winter. You touch him, just a little longer than needed, and one night, under a sky thick with stars and owls, he kisses you. It is not courtly, it is not pure, but it is true. And it happens again and again, and you love him for 5 seasons. Then plague comes, and he dies, and you survive. No marriage, no children, no records, just memory. But isn't that still love? Even if no chronicler inked it in gold? Even if no priest blessed it? Even if history forgot? The church did not forget. It tried to erase such love, to control it, to name it sinful. But it kept slipping through their fingers, because love, like water, finds its cracks, even in monasteries. Yes, even there. Don't look so surprised. Beneath the silence and song of cloisters, hearts beat too. You are Brother Thomas, a novice in the Benedictine order. You've taken vows of chastity, obedience, poverty, but you are also 17. And Brother Matthew, 2 years older, with ink-stained fingers and eyes like moonlight, smiles at you in the scriptorium. At first it's just conversation, Latin grammar, psalms. Then it's glances, lingering touches as you pass books. Then it's more, much more, and suddenly you are torn between your God and something that feels holier than anything you've ever read. The guilt is unbearable. The joy is blinding. You cry in the chapel one night, forehead against cold stone, begging forgiveness you're not sure you want. And he is gone by morning, transferred. You are alone again. And for the rest of your life you wonder, was that sin or salvation? You never speak of it again. But you remember, you always remember, because medieval love was not neatly contained. It spilled over walls, into convents, into prisons, into battlefield tents. Yes, love was even found in war. Picture 2 camps divided by a river, the 100 Years' War, English and French. But one night, during a lull in fighting, 2 squires meet at a ruined bridge. They talk, trade wine. A joke is told, and for a brief moment, just one, swords are forgotten, only hearts remain. Does it lead to anything? Number. But it leaves a mark, a glimpse of what might be if the world were less cruel. And sometimes, rarely, impossibly, love triumphed. The mason who saved for years to buy his sweetheart a ring, the alewife who disguised her lover as a cousin just so he could live with her, the knight who defied his liege and married a farmer's daughter. These were not the tales sung in great halls, but they were real and more common than we think. Because even in an age of fire, plague, and faith, love found a way. In the margins, in the pauses, in the breath between sermons, and as you sit there imagining those stolen kisses and whispered names, I ask you, isn't that the most human thing of all? To reach across time and fear and rule for connection, to dare to say, I choose you, even when the world says you mustn't? To believe, if only for a moment, that love is stronger than fate? The Middle Ages were not loveless. They were full of love, messy, magnificent, fleeting, forbidden, but always, always alive. And now that you've felt it, heard their voices, walked their roads, you carry it too. Not just knowledge, not just history, but the echo of hearts that refuse to be silenced. And once you've heard those echoes, those trembling declarations etched in fear and long, not just in cathedrals and court records, but in the margins of parchment, in the folds of faded fabric, in the hollow of a ring left behind, because medieval lovers, stifled by rules and walls and eyes that never blinked, became experts in sigil, in code, in symbols, in meaning that passed not through the tongue, but through the gesture. You are walking through a market now. Let's say it's Paris, or perhaps York. The square is muddy. Pigs shriek. A bell tolls the hour. You brush past a girl, barely more than 14, selling apples. She drops one. You bend to pick it up. And for a brief second, your eyes meet. She smiles, fleeting, quick. But the meaning is there, not just courtesy, invitation. But how do you speak in a world where you must never say the words aloud? With flowers, of course. A sprig of rosemary tucked into a sleeve, faithfulness. A blue cornflower woven into your braid, hope. A daisy, innocence. A marigold? That's trickier. Some said it meant pain, others despair, and others still desire. Meanings changed from place to place, town to town. But for those in love or hoping to be, the message was always clearer in the giving than the interpretation. A boy hands you a violet. You accept it with a lowered gaze. That's enough. You'll meet after Vespers, by the chapel wall. Of course, not everyone relied on flowers. There were rings, some crude, just twisted copper or carved wood, others intricate, with two hands clasped in gold, forming a lover's knot. The Fed ring, they called it, from the Latin fides, faith. To give one was to say, I am yours. To wear one? A declaration of takenness that no village gossip could unmake. And what of letters? Ah, the love letters. Rare, yes. Risky, yes. But some survived, written in clumsy Latin, or in courtly French, or in the plain, scratchy Middle English of those who never trained their hands for ink, but wrote anyway, because the heart had to speak. One such letter, penned by a woman named Marjorie Bruce in 1477, still survives. She wrote to her sweetheart John Paston, calling him, my right well-beloved Valentine. She begged him not to doubt her love, not to break the engagement her father now resisted. If that you love me, she wrote, as I truly trust you do, you will not leave me. Can you imagine the tremble in her fingers, the wax on the seal, still warm, the fear that her servant might read it, the hope that he would? We forget sometimes how much courage love demanded, how much strategy. Courtship was not just romantic, it was tactical, a high-stakes game of observation, timing, and careful maneuvering through a world armed with consequences. Take, for example, the custom of grooms' visits. In many regions, especially among peasant communities, a young man would visit a girl's house at night. He would knock. Her parents, knowing, always knowing, might pretend to be asleep, and she would let him in. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they lay down, fully clothed perhaps, or perhaps not. This was known as bundling, two lovers sharing a bed with a board between them, or not. Depending on the region, it might have been scandalous, or it might have been courtship. In Iceland, they even had a phrase for it, svala saman, to sleep together, literally. But not necessarily carnally. Some folklorists still argue about whether it was meant to encourage restraint or allow limited indulgence. But the truth? The truth is probably both. Because the Middle Ages were not one culture, they were many, not one belief, but countless. And for every rule, there was an exception. For every punishment, a back door. For every pious sermon, a pair of lips behind the barn saying otherwise. Still, these rituals came with risk. If a girl became pregnant before marriage, the shame was immense. Her options, few. And yet, sometimes, that pregnancy was the proof of love, the seal that forced a marriage where permission might never have been granted. In some cases, it even acted as a test. Will he marry me if this happens? Sometimes he did. Sometimes he vanished. And then she was alone. And the church, that great arbiter of morality, was not always kind, nor was the village. But let's leave pain behind for a moment. Let's talk instead of games. Yes, games. Because medieval courtship, especially among the young, was often playful, flirty, full of mischievous joy. At May Day festivals, boys and girls ran into the woods together. They danced. They sang bawdy songs. They crowned the May Queen and Green Man. Sometimes they kissed. Sometimes more. It was tolerated for one day and then forgotten. A release valve for a society that otherwise tightened its grip on virtue. There were also love riddles, naughty jokes, songs full of double meanings, and dances. Oh, the dances. Picture a line of village youths circling each other in the firelight, clapping hands and stamping feet. You steal a glance at the girl across from you. She sees you. Your fingers touch. That moment might be your whole courtship, or the beginning of a lifetime. But what if you're shy? What if you never danced? What if you're a girl, locked in your father's house? Then you might turn to charms, to love potions, to the old woman at the edge of the village who sells more than just salves. You pay her with eggs, or thread, or a secret. And she gives you a sachet of dried herbs, rose petals, mugwort, wormwood, and tells you to burn it under the boy's window. Or she gives you a phrase, an incantation. Say this when he looks at you. Do you believe it? Maybe. But belief in love is half the battle, and so you say it. He looks, and your heart leaps. There were even spells recorded in grimoires, in Latin, in the margins of prayer books. One instructed the reader to write a girl's name in bat's blood on a scrap of lambskin and bury it under her threshold. Another involved whispering her name while touching iron and reciting the Lord's Prayer backward. Desperate? Yes. But isn't love always desperate? Isn't it always magic? And still, for some, the games never mattered. The codes, the dances, the gifts, they didn't play at love, they seized it. Because passion, in any age, can erupt like wildfire. You are Elena, a merchant's daughter in Venice. Your father wants you to marry a spice trader from Genoa. You want the orphaned boy who paints frescoes in the cloister. You are 16. And one night, you leave. Not to be married, not to be bought, but to be free. You vanish down an alley, hand in hand with your lover, the city folding behind you like a closing flower. Your name is never written in the family ledger again. But in some tiny village by the sea, there is a house with peeling paint and two figures laughing on the porch. And in that laughter, the whole world is reborn. Because in the end, medieval dating wasn't just about marriage, or chastity, or survival. It was about daring, about reaching out when everything told you to pull back, about feeling in a world so often numb with fear and frost. And if you listen closely enough, Beneath the layers of sermons, laws, and silence, you'll hear them. Lovers whispering through the centuries. Their words aren't loud, but they're there, just beneath the surface, waiting to be heard again. But not all endings are soft. Not every stolen glance leads to love. And not every marriage is chosen. You wake one morning, and the world has changed. You are 13. Your childhood still clings to you like dust in the folds of your dress. But your father has sold the sheep, and with the coin, a deal has been made. The merchant's son, Ambrose, is coming. You've never met him. But you are told he is respectable, that his family owns a shop, that you'll have your own room, that he will take care of you. What they don't say is that he is 32, or that his first wife died in childbirth. They do not ask what you feel, because your feelings are not part of the transaction. You are not a daughter, you are a dowry, and you are not alone. Across Europe, from Flanders to Florence, girls as young as 12 were married to men twice, sometimes 3 times their age. Why? Because marriage wasn't built for love. It was built for inheritance, for property, for alliances, for control. To marry a girl young meant to shape her mind, her habits, her womb. To marry her off meant to move a burden, one less mouth, one more alliance. You're not expected to like it. You're expected to survive it. And if you don't, then perhaps your younger sister will take your place. There is always another. But that does not mean there was no hope, no protest, no defiance. In some regions, like certain free towns in Germany or the Low Countries, women had more say. A girl could refuse, not always, not safely. But sometimes she did, and sometimes courts listened. In one record from the 14th century Ghent, a girl named Lisbeth took her father to court for promising her to a man she despised. She claimed she had already given her troth, her word, to another. And the court ruled in her favor. That was rare, but not unheard of. Still, the risks of defiance were immense. Refuse the match, and you might be beaten, locked away, disowned. And even if you agreed, the future might hold other horrors, because marriage could be a prison. It could be a cage built of law and iron and custom with no key. Once the vows were spoken, a woman's legal identity disappeared into her husband's. In England, the law of coverture meant a wife could not own property, sign contracts, or even file legal complaints in her own name. She was his, body, mind, everything. If he beat her, the law often looked away. If he took her by force, even within marriage, that was not rape, because consent, once given, was seen as permanent, irrevocable, even in suffering. And yet, not every marriage was cruel. Some husbands loved their wives fiercely, tenderly. There are records of men writing poems for the women they married, of carving love notes into the beams of their shared homes. There are letters brimming with yearning from husbands away at war, begging their wives to write back. There are even wills in which men left everything they owned to their wives, despite pressure to pass wealth only through sons. Because love, even in chains, still found a way to bloom. But those were the lucky ones. Most unions were not made of passion. They were made of negotiation. Behind every medieval marriage was a ledger, and in that ledger, numbers. How much land? How many oxen? What part of the vineyard? How large the dowry? And that dowry could be vast: cloth, livestock, money, jewels, or meager, depending on class. But it was never small in meaning. A good dowry could raise your family's standing. A poor one could curse your prospects, and it wasn't always paid in full. Sometimes it was pledged, sometimes delayed, sometimes, if the bride died young, never paid at all. In Florence, notaries kept meticulous records of dowry disputes. Fathers sued sons-in-law, Wives sued brothers. Some marriages collapsed under the weight of debts owed, not love lost. The dowry was a contract, and when love failed, the numbers remained. But even within these constraints, people dreamed, longed, schemed. You are a scribe in Toulouse, you earn little, you sleep above the dye shop, but there is a girl who passes by every morning carrying bread in a basket. You learn her name, Aline. You dare to speak. She dares to smile. But her father is a tax collector, and you are nothing. So you wait. You copy manuscripts by candlelight, you save every coin, and after 5 years, you offer a ring. He says no, but Aline, she runs. She meets you in the square. You marry in secret. The priest records the union. The banns are never read. But it is done. You are hers, and she is yours. You flee to Avignon and never look back. These stories of flight, of passion, of rebellion echo against the thunderous walls of a system built to crush them, because for every marriage that trapped, one escaped. For every girl bartered, one fought back. And over centuries, change crept in. Little by little, the church began to ask, did both parties consent? The courts began to listen. Were they of age? Canon law insisted, at least in theory, that marriage required free will. It did not always work, but it existed. And in that fragile line of ink on parchment, a new idea was born. That marriage could be more than duty. That love could be a reason, not an accident. But it would take centuries more to become truth. Still, it began here, in small moments, in whispered no's, in secret yeses, in girls who ran, in boys who stayed, in hands that chose each other, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. And you watching now, you know this. You carry it. That defiant spark, that belief that love is not a debt or a duty, but a choice. And it began long ago, in stone churches, on muddy roads, between terrified hearts and trembling hands. Medieval dating was not sweet, it was not simple, it was brutal, unfair, risky. But within it, the first seeds of something else, of love that said, I see you, not your dowry, not your family, not your station, you. And that is why we remember, not just the customs, the laws, the punishments, but the lovers who dared to feel, who dared to want, and sometimes, just sometimes, dared to win. The candle burns low, shadows stretch long across the stone wall, and the air feels thick with everything we've seen, felt, together. You've walked through courts and convents. You've stood in smoky kitchens and behind cathedral altars. You've heard whispers behind veils, screams behind doors, laughter beneath orchard trees. And now, the story ends. Or does it? Because the truth is, it never really ended. The world of medieval love didn't vanish. It transformed. It lingered. It bled into what came after. You see it in the laws, in the languages of marriage, in the phrases we still use, to wed, to court, to promise one's hand. These are not modern inventions. They're echoes. The rituals may look different now, but the bones, still there. We still wear rings on the fourth finger of the left hand. Why? Because medieval anatomists believed a vein ran straight from that finger to the heart. The vena amoris, the vein of love. It's a myth, of course, but it felt true. We still ask a parent's blessing, even when we don't need it. We still say, "Till death do us part," words that come not from poets, but from the medieval church's Sarum rite of marriage. We even still talk of making a match. And in those words, 1,000 years of matchmaking live on, nuns arranging dowries, mothers whispering behind market stalls, fathers balancing debts, and daughters with the same hand. And yet, what we call love today, real love, was something the medieval world feared as much as it craved, because it could disrupt everything. Fall in love with someone from the wrong family, you could spark a blood feud. Choose a spouse without your lord's permission, you could lose your land, marry beneath you. You could shame your name, your kin, your line. But fall in love some still did, even kings, even queens. Think of Eleanor of Aquitaine, twice married, once to the King of France, then to the King of England, a woman of fire whose letters still pulse with wit and want. She may have been married for politics, but she lived and loved fiercely, perhaps even dangerously. Think of Edward IV, who shocked the entire English court by marrying Elizabeth Woodville in secret, a commoner, a widow, a woman with no political advantage to offer. And yet he chose her. It was scandalous. It was reckless. It was love. Or maybe it was lust. But sometimes, wasn't that enough? And sometimes love was armor, protection. Think of Eloise and Abelard. He, a philosopher, she, a scholar and student. Their affair scandalized the church. Their passion led to exile, to violence, to loss. But their letters, those furious, aching letters, still survive. Centuries later, they whisper across time. And in their ink, the truth, that medieval love was not just about obedience or sin, it was about longing, transcendence, hope, and heartbreak. Because for all the rules of dowries, bans, church courts, contracts, there was always the heart. And the heart has never cared much for rules. Still, not all hearts beat freely. Let's not romanticize it. For every Eleanor, there were 1,000 girls whose names were never written down, who were bought, broken, forgotten. For every Abelard, there were priests who preyed on the powerless. And for every poetic letter, there was a woman who could not read. History is not only made of heroes, it is made of them too, of the silent, the used, the voiceless. And when we speak of medieval dating, we must speak of all of them, the joy, the rot, the candles lit in secret, the doors that never opened again, because history isn't just about what happened, it's about who survived it. And many didn't, but some did. And they passed down stories, customs, superstitions, hopes. Maybe your grandmother wore a veil on her wedding day. That veil has roots in medieval times, meant to ward off spirits and shield a bride from envy. Maybe someone in your family wore blue, not white, because blue was once the color of purity, of the Virgin Mary. White didn't dominate until Queen Victoria centuries later. Maybe your family tells the tale of a forbidden love, a marriage that shocked, a couple that eloped. And maybe, just maybe, you carry their blood, their defiance, their yearning. So you see, the story we told, it's not gone. It lives in you. Every time you love against advice, every time you say no, every time you choose, not because you were told to, but because you feel it in your bones. That's not modern. That's ancient as love itself, because even in the darkest halls of a medieval castle, even in the coldest convent cell, even in the dirtiest alley of a plague-stricken town, people loved. They risked, they suffered, and sometimes they triumphed. And that is the legacy, not a perfect one, not a fair one, but a real one, a human one. So the next time someone tells you medieval people didn't know about romance, remember this. They bled for it. They died for it. And sometimes, just sometimes, they lived for it too. So light your candle, close your eyes, and imagine their footsteps in the dark. Because they were here, and so are you. Thank you for walking this long road with me. If this journey touched you, if you felt the weight of their stories, please share it. Leave a comment. Let me know what you felt, what you saw, what you carry now. And if you haven't yet, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me more than you can imagine. and it keeps these stories, their stories, alive. Wherever you are and whoever you love, good night, and may history never forget the lovers